The great hall of the Vorthok Empire stretched wider than most human cities. Golden pillars rose from the floor like metal trees, each one carved with the victories of Emperor Kungho's reign. Purple banners hung from the ceiling, showing the three-headed serpent symbol of the empire. The air smelled of expensive metals, and the fear of those who served the emperor. Kungho sat on his throne, made from the bones of his enemies. His blue skin gleamed under the bright lights, and his forearms rested on the armrests with casual power. His red eyes looked down at the creatures before him, with the cold interest of someone choosing which tool to use for a job. "Show me my new weapons," he commanded. The breeding master, a thin Vorthok named Taman, bowed so low his head almost touched the floor. "Great Emperor, these are the finest warwolves we have ever created. Each one is perfect in every way." The warwolves stood in a straight line across the hall. They were beautiful and terrible at the same time. Each beast stood 8 feet tall. On their back legs, with muscles that moved under their skin like steel cables. Their fur changed colors as they breathed, shifting from deep blue to bright silver to dark red. Their claws were longer than human fingers and sharp enough to cut through spaceship walls. Emperor Kyungho walked slowly down the line, looking at each wolf with careful eyes. These creatures would lead his armies when he conquered the human worlds. They had to be perfect because anything less would shame his empire. The first wolf had fur that sparkled like stars. Its eyes were bright yellow and focused straight ahead. When the emperor stopped in front of it, the wolf's muscles tensed, ready for any command. "This one has strength," the emperor said, nodding with approval. The second wolf was even larger, with silver fur that moved like liquid metal. Its teeth were white as snow and sharp as broken glass. When it breathed, small puffs of steam came from its nose. "This one has power," the emperor said. He moved to the third wolf, then the fourth, then the fifth. Each one was magnificent. Each one was exactly what he wanted his armies to see when they faced the empire's enemies. Fear and respect, power and beauty, all mixed together in creatures that looked like living weapons. But then he reached the end of the line. The last wolf was different. It stood just as tall as the others, but something was wrong. Its fur was mostly gray instead of the changing colors of its siblings. Patches of dull brown covered its left side like old stains. One eye was slightly larger than the other, giving it a crooked look. Its movements were not smooth like the others. When it tried to stand perfectly straight, it swayed a little, as if fighting to keep its balance. Emperor Kyungho stopped walking. His red eyes grew narrow as he stared at the creature. "What is this?" he asked, his voice getting louder. Taman's face went pale. "Great Emperor, this one had some small problems during the growing process, but it is still strong and intelligent. In the training fights, it performed just as well as the others." "Just as well?" The Emperor's voice rose higher. "Just as well." The whole hall went quiet. Even the perfect warwolves seemed to sense the danger in the air. Emperor Kyungho walked closer to the imperfect wolf. The creature looked back at him with confusion in its mismatched eyes. It had trained every day since it was born. It had fought in every practice battle. It had learned to follow orders and use weapons just like its siblings. But it could see in the Emperor's face that none of that mattered. "You bring me this broken thing and tell me it is just as good as perfection?" The Emperor's forearms moved as he spoke, showing his anger. "Do you think I am a fool?" "No, Great Emperor," Taman said quickly. "But its abilities are strong. In the tests it showed clever thinking and good fighting skills." "I do not care about its skills," the Emperor said, his voice cold as deep space. "Look at it. Look at those ugly patches on its fur. Look at its crooked face. Look at how it cannot even stand straight." The imperfect wolf's ears dropped as it heard these words. It did not understand all of the Emperor's language, but it knew the tone meant bad things. It had always wondered why the other wolves got better food and more attention from the trainers. Now it was starting to understand. "When my enemies see my warwolves, they should feel fear and respect," the Emperor continued. "They should see perfect creatures that represent the power of the Vorthok Empire. What will they think when they see this ugly, broken thing?" The Emperor walked around the wolf, pointing out each flaw. "They will think we are weak. They will think we cannot even create proper weapons. They will laugh at us instead of surrendering. But Great Emperor Taman tried again. Its different appearance might actually help in battle. Enemies might underestimate it. Underestimate it. The Emperor's laugh was harsh and cold. I underestimate it. Everyone who sees it will underestimate it, because it is not worthy of respect. The imperfect wolf tried to stand straighter, tried to make its fur change colors like its siblings. But the gray patches stayed gray, and its crooked stance remained crooked. It was what it was, and no amount of trying would change that. This creature is an insult to everything the Vorthok Empire stands for, the Emperor declared. We are the perfect race. We conquer worlds because we are better than all other species. Our weapons must show this perfection. He turned to face his guards. Take this abomination away from my sight. Throw it into the waste sectors where it belongs. Let it die slowly and forgotten, as all imperfect things should. 2 large Vorthok guards moved forward to grab the wolf. The creature looked around at its siblings, hoping one of them would defend it. But the perfect werewolves just stood in their line, staring straight ahead. They had learned long ago that showing any weakness or sentiment would mark them as imperfect too. As the guards dragged the wolf away, its claws scraped against the smooth floor. Tried to look back at the Emperor, confused about why it was being punished. It had done everything right. It had trained hard and fought well. But none of that mattered because it did not look the way the Emperor wanted. Let this be a lesson, Emperor Kyung-ho announced to everyone in the hall. The Vorthok Empire accepts only perfection. Anything less is garbage. The great doors of the hall closed behind the struggling wolf and its guards. Soon it would be thrown into the dark waste levels of the space station, left to die among the broken machines and rotting garbage. The Emperor had made his judgment, and in the Vorthok Empire, the Emperor's word was absolute. But somewhere in the lower levels of the station, a human mechanic was about to discover that one being's garbage might be another's treasure. The perfect. Werewolves remained in their line, ready to serve their Emperor. But the imperfect one was gone, cast aside like a broken tool. None of them knew that this rejection would change the fate of the entire galaxy. Deep in the belly of the massive space station, where the lights were dim and the air smelled of oil and metal, Bahram crawled through another maintenance tunnel. Her blue work clothes were dirty with grease, and sweat dripped from her forehead. As she worked, the tunnel was barely wide enough for her small human body, but that was exactly why the Vorthok kept humans around. Stupid aliens and their stupid big bodies, she muttered to herself as she squeezed past a bundle of thick cables. Can't fit into their own machines when they break. BRM had been working in these tunnels for 3 years now. 3 long years since her transport ship had been captured during what was supposed to be a simple supply run. She remembered that day clearly. The Vorthok warships had appeared out of nowhere, their weapons charging up like angry red eyes. Her captain had tried to run, but human ships were no match for Vorthok technology. Most of the crew had been killed in the attack. Bioram and 12 other humans had been kept alive because the Vorthok needed workers who could fix their machines in tight spaces. Humans were small and clever with their hands, which made them useful for maintenance work. But useful did not mean respected. The Vorthok treated humans like living tools. They gave them just enough food to keep working and just enough shelter to stay alive. They never spoke to humans unless giving orders, and those orders were always harsh and demanding. To the Vorthok, humans were barely better than the machines they fixed. But Bahram had learned to use this treatment to her advantage, because the Vorthok saw her as nothing more than a tool. They ignored her most of the time. They talked freely around her, thinking she was too stupid to understand their language. They left important documents where she could see them, assuming she could. Not read Vorthok writing. They were wrong on both counts. BORM had spent every free moment of the past 3 years learning. She studied the Vorthok language by listening to their conversations and watching their computer screens. She learned to read their writing by looking at the labels on machines and the instructions on repair manuals. She memorized the layout of the space station by crawling through every tunnel and service corridor. Most importantly, she learned about their technology. Every machine she fixed taught her something new about how the Vorthok built things. Every broken part she replaced showed her a weakness in their designs. Every system she repaired gave her access to information the Vorthok never meant for her. To see the other humans thought she was just good at her job. They did not know that Borum had been a military engineer before her capture. She had worked on classified human defense projects, designing systems to protect Earth colonies from alien attacks. Her capture had not been an accident at all. Borum reached the end of the tunnel and pulled out her tools. The gravity regulator was making strange noises again, which meant one of the inner components was probably cracked. She opened the access panel and shined her light inside. "There you are," she said, spotting the broken part. "Let me get you fixed up," she worked. Borum listened to the sounds of the station around her. The hum of the engines, the whisper of air through the ventilation system, the distant voices of Vorthok officers giving orders. She had learned to read the station's mood through these sounds. And today something felt different. There had been more activity than usual in the upper levels. More guards moving around, more announcements on the communication system. Something important was happening. But Borum had not been able to figure out what yet. She finished replacing the broken part and closed the access panel. The gravity regulator hummed back to life, working smoothly again. Another job done, another. A small piece of the station depending on her work to keep functioning. Borum started crawling back through the tunnel, but stopped when she heard a strange sound. It was faint, coming from somewhere below her current position. A soft whimpering noise like an animal in pain. She listened carefully. The sound came again, definitely from the waste disposal area one level down. Borum frowned. There should not be any animals in the waste sector. The Vorthok kept their war creatures in special, housing areas with proper food and medical care. Curiosity got the better of her. Borum found a service ladder and climbed down to the waste level. The smell here was much worse, full of rotting, garbage and chemical waste. The lights were even dimmer, creating deep shadows everywhere. She followed the sound deeper into the waste sector, past piles of broken machinery and containers of disgusting alien food scraps. The whimpering grew louder as she got closer to its source. Finally, she found it. In a corner behind a pile of scrap metal, a massive creature lay on its side. Borum's heart jumped when she first saw it. The thing was huge, much bigger than any Earth animal she had ever seen. Its gray and brown fur was matted with dirt and waste. One of its eyes was swollen shut, and she could see cuts and bruises all over its body. But as Borum looked closer, realized this was not a wild animal. The creature's shape was too organized, too purposeful. This was one of the war wolves she had heard the Vorthok talking about. But what was it doing in the waste sector? The wolf's good eye opened and looked at her. Borum expected to see hunger or anger, the look of a predator ready to attack. Instead, she saw something that surprised her. The eye held intelligence. And more than that, it held sadness. "Hey there, big guy," Borum said softly, keeping her voice calm. "What are you doing down here?" The wolf tried to lift its head but was too weak. Its breathing was shallow and quick, the kind of breathing that meant serious trouble. Borum could see that the creature had not eaten in days, maybe weeks. Without help, it would die soon. Borum knew she should walk away. Getting involved with a Vorthok war creature could get her killed. The aliens had strict rules about humans staying away from their military assets. If they caught her here, they would probably throw her out of an airlock. But as she looked at the dying wolf, Borum saw something familiar in its eyes. The look of someone who had been thrown away, considered worthless by those in power. The look of someone who had been judged and found wanting not because of what they could do, but because of what they looked like. She had seen that look in the mirror every day for 3 years. "You're not supposed to be here, are you?" she asked the wolf. "Someone threw you away like garbage." The wolf's eye blinked once, as if it understood her words. Borum made her decision. She could not save herself yet, but maybe she could save this creature. Maybe they could help each other survive in this place that saw them both as worthless. "Okay, big guy," she said, moving closer. "Let's see what we can do about this." The wolf did not try to bite her as she approached. was too weak to fight, but more than that, it seemed to understand that she was trying to help. Gently touched its head. The wolf's eye closed with what looked like relief. For the first time in 3 years, Barham was not alone. She had found another outcast, another being that the Vorthok had decided was not worth keeping. Aliens. Bjorn believed that everyone deserved a chance to prove their worth. She just had to keep them both alive long enough to do it. Barham knew she had to move fast. The werewolf was dying, and she could not help it properly in the waste sector. But she also could not let anyone see her with the creature. If the Vorthok discovered what she was doing, they would kill them. Both. She looked around the garbage-filled area and spotted an old storage room that had been abandoned years ago. The door was broken, but it would provide shelter and keep them hidden from the security patrols. "Come on, big guy," she whispered to the wolf. "We need to get you somewhere safe." The wolf tried to stand but collapsed back down. It was too weak to walk. Bjorn bit her lip, thinking hard. The creature weighed at least 3 times as much. As she did, but she had to find a way to move it. She found an old transport cart among the scrap metal. The wheels were rusty, but it still rolled. Working carefully, she managed to get the wolf onto the cart and push it to the storage room. Every few minutes, she stopped to listen for footsteps or voices. But the waste sector was always empty during the night shift. The storage room was small and dusty, but it had a working light and a water pipe that still functioned. Bjorn made a bed from old maintenance cloths and gently helped the wolf lie down. The creature's breathing was still weak, but it's good I watched her with growing trust. "First things first," Bjorn said. "You need water." She filled a container from the pipe and held it near the wolf's mouth. The creature drank slowly at first, then more eagerly as it realized how thirsty it had been. Some of the water spilled onto its fur, washing away some of the dirt and grime. Next came the harder problem. Food. Barham knew the wolf needed to eat, but she had no idea what werewolves were supposed to eat. She decided to start with what she could get from the human food supplies. Over the next few days, Barham developed a routine. She would do her regular maintenance work during the day, acting normal around the other humans and the Vorthok overseers. But every chance she got, she would slip away to check on the wolf. She brought water, food scraps from the human meals, and clean cloths to tend the creature's wounds. Slowly, the wolf began to recover. Its breathing grew stronger, and the swelling around its clothes went down. On the 4th day, something amazing happened. The wolf spoke, not in words, but in a series of low growls and whines that Barham somehow understood. The creature was trying to say thank you. "You can understand me, can't you?" Barham asked, sitting cross-legged beside the wolf. "The wolf's good." I blinked once, then twice. Bjorn smiled. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. 1 blink. "That's incredible. You're much smarter than they think you are." Barham began talking to the wolf during her visits, telling it about her life and her work. She explained how she had been captured, how she had learned to survive on the station, and how she had been watching and learning about the Vorthok for 3 years. The wolf listened to everything, its intelligent eye following her movements and expressions. Sometimes it would make soft sounds that seemed like questions, and Bjorn would try to answer them by the end of the first week. The wolf could stand and walk around the small storage room. Bjorn decided to call it Deho. After a brave soldier from human history who had fought against impossible odds, Deho seemed to like the name. When Barham said it, his ears would perk up and his tail would move slightly. It was the first time anyone had given him a name that was not an insult. As Deho grew stronger, Bjorn began to notice things about him that the Emperor had completely missed. The patches of gray fur that looked so ugly were actually perfect camouflage in the dimly lit corridors of the station. When Deho pressed himself against the metal walls, he almost disappeared from sight. His asymmetrical eyes were not a flaw. Either. Bjorn realized that the larger eye could see much better in the dark, while the smaller one was more sensitive to movement and changes in light. Together, they gave Deho vision that was far superior to his perfect siblings. Even his awkward movements turned out to be an advantage, where the other werewolves moved with predictable grace. Daeho's irregular gait made it impossible to guess which direction he would go next. In a fight, this would make him much harder to hit. "You're not broken at all," Borum told him one evening as she cleaned a cut on his shoulder. "You're just different, and different can be better than perfect." Daeho made a sound that was almost like a purr. For the first time in his life, someone saw his differences as strengths instead of weaknesses. As the days passed, Borum began teaching Daeho about human culture and technology. She showed him how to read simple words in human language, how to understand basic engineering concepts, now to move quietly through the station's corridors and return. Daeho taught Borum about Vorthok military tactics and technology. His training as a werewolf had given him knowledge about their weapons, their strategies, and their weaknesses. He could not speak human words, but he could draw simple pictures in the dust with his claw and use gestures to communicate complex ideas. Borum learned that the Vorthok werewolves were not just weapons. They were tactical partners, bred to think and plan alongside their handlers. They understood battle strategies, could operate simple machinery, and could even make independent decisions when separated from their units. But most importantly, they were designed to form strong emotional bonds with their partners. This was supposed to make them loyal and obedient. Instead, it made them capable of real friendship and love. The bond between Borum and Daeho grew stronger every day. They began to understand each other without words, communicating through glances and gestures. Borum would know when Daeho was hungry or tired just by looking at him. Daeho could tell when Borum was worried or scared by the way she moved. After 3 weeks, Daeho was completely healed and much stronger than before. But instead of leaving, he chose to stay with Borum. He had found something he had never expected to find: a friend who valued him for who he was. It's not what he was supposed to be. Borum realized that she had found something too. For 3 years, she had been planning and waiting for the right moment to strike back at the Vorthok. But she had always been just one small human against an entire empire. Now she had a partner. Someone who understood the enemy from the inside. Who possessed abilities she could never have, and who had just as much reason to hate the Vorthok as she did. "What do you say, Daeho?" Ymir asked him one night as they sat together in their hidden room, ready to show them what a couple of rejects can do. Daeho's response was a low growl that sounded almost like laughter. His eyes gleamed with intelligence and determination. He was ready for whatever came next. The unwanted werewolf and the captured human had become more than friends. They had become a team, and together they were about to change the fate of the galaxy. 2 months had passed since Borum found Daeho in the waste sector. The wolf had grown stronger and more confident, and their partnership had become something neither of them had expected. But now it was time for Borum to reveal the truth about who she really was and why she had been captured. They sat together in their hidden room, sharing the evening meal that Borum had managed to steal from the kitchen storage. Daeho had learned to eat human food, though he still preferred the occasional piece of fresh meat that Borum could smuggle from the Vorthok supplies. "Daeho," Borum said quietly, "I need to tell you something important. Something I have never told anyone else on this station." The wolf's ears perked up, and he gave her his full attention. Over the past weeks, he had learned to read her moods and expressions. He could tell that whatever she was about to say was serious. "I was not just a mechanic when they captured me," Borum began. "That was my cover story, but it was not the truth." She took a deep breath and continued. "I was a military engineer working for the Human Defense Command. My real name is Lieutenant Borum Kim, and I was sent here on a mission." Daeho tilted, his head confused. Borum had taught him some human military terms, but this was still a lot to understand. "The humans know about the Vorthok plan to invade our worlds," Borum explained. "We have been preparing for war for years, but we needed to know more about their technology and their strategy, so they sent me to get captured on purpose." She pulled out a small device that she had kept hidden in her toolkit. It looked like a simple repair tool, but Daeho could see that it was something else entirely. "This is a data recorder," Borum said. "For 3 years, I have been collecting information about everything on this station. Ship designs, weapon specifications, troop movements, communication codes, everything the human fleet needs to defend our worlds." Daeho made a low sound that meant he understood. but his expression also showed concern. If Borum was a spy, then she was in great danger. The problem is getting the information back to human space, Borum continued. I have all the data, but I need to send it through the station's main communication array. And that array is in the most heavily guarded part of the station. She showed Daeho a hand-drawn map of the station's upper levels. The communication center was marked with a red X, surrounded by guard posts and security checkpoints. Have been planning this mission for months, Borum said. But I always knew it would be nearly impossible to do alone. A human has no business being in the Imperial sections of the station. The guards would catch me before I got halfway there. Daeho studied the map carefully. He recognized some of the areas from his training days, before he had been rejected. His handlers had taken him and his siblings through parts of the upper levels during their combat exercises. But you, Borum said, pointing to Daeho, you are different. You are still a werewolf, even if they threw you away. Your biological signatures would let you pass through some of the security systems. Your abilities would help us get through the areas where we have to sneak. She leaned forward, her voice becoming more urgent. Daeho, I am not asking you to do this for me. I am asking you to do this for both of us. The Vorthok are planning to attack human worlds in 6 months. Of people will die if we cannot warn them. The wolf was quiet for a long moment, thinking about what Borum had told him. He understood the danger, but he also understood something else. This was their chance to strike back at the Empire that rejected them both. Borum waited patiently while Daeho considered her words. She knew this was a lot to ask. If they were caught, the Vorthok would not just kill them. They would make their death slow and painful as an example to others. Finally, Daeho looked up at her and gave a single blink. Yes, are you sure? Borum asked. Once we start this mission, there is no going back. We will either succeed or die trying. Another single blink. Daeho was sure. Borum felt a wave of relief and gratitude wash over her. She had hoped that Daeho would agree, but she had been prepared for him to refuse. After all, he had no obligation to help humans in their war against the Vorthok. Thank you, she said, reaching out to touch his head. I promise you we will. Make them pay for what they did to us. Over the next few days, Borum began showing Daeho the detailed plans she had been working on. She had studied the guard schedules, the security protocols, and the layout of the upper levels. She knew which routes were most likely to be empty, which systems could be disabled, which guards could be avoided. But she also knew that no plan survives contact with the enemy. They would have to be ready to adapt and improvise when things went wrong. The communication array is in the central tower, Borum explained, pointing to her map. To get there, we have to pass through 3 security checkpoints, avoid 2 guard patrols, and disable at least 4 different alarm systems. Daeho studied the route carefully. His training had taught him to think tactically, to look for weaknesses and opportunities. He began making marks on the map with his claw, showing Borum alternative routes and potential problems she had missed. You are right, Borum said, looking at his suggestions. That corridor would be better than the one I had planned. You are correct about the blind spot near the 3rd checkpoint. Working together, they refined the plan until it was as perfect as they could make it. They identified 3 different routes to the communication center, planned escape routes for different scenarios, prepared backup plans for when the primary mission failed. But the most important part of their preparation was learning to work together as a team. Borum practiced moving silently through the corridors, learning to match Daeho's careful footsteps. Daeho learned to understand her hand signals and to respond instantly to her commands. They also prepared their equipment. Borum had been collecting useful items for months, hiding them in various locations throughout the station. Cutting tools, communication devices, medical supplies, and even a few weapons she had built from scrap metal. Tomorrow night, Borum said as they completed their final preparations, the night shift will have the fewest guards, and there is a maintenance shutdown scheduled for the security systems in Sector 7. It is our best chance. Daeho nodded his understanding. Was ready? Borum looked at her companion. this rejected werewolf, who had become her closest friend and partner. Tomorrow, they would either succeed in their mission and help save millions of human lives, or they would die trying. But either way, they would face it together. The unwanted human and the discarded werewolf, proving that sometimes the greatest strength comes from those who have been underestimated. "Get some rest," Borum said. "Tomorrow we show the Vorthok what happens when they throw away the wrong people." The station's night cycle had begun, and most of the Vorthok were in their rest quarters. Borum and Deho moved through the maintenance tunnels like shadows, their hearts beating fast with nervous energy. This was the moment they had been preparing. Forbot Borum carried her tools and the data recorder. Deho moved ahead of her, using his superior senses to watch for danger. His gray patches made him nearly invisible in the dim corridors, just as Borum had predicted. They reached the first checkpoint without any problems. The security scanner was designed to detect unauthorized biological signatures, but Deho's werewolf genetics allowed him to pass through safely. The system recognized him as a legitimate military asset and let him continue. "So far, so good," Borum whispered as they moved past the checkpoint. The second part of their route took them through the residential areas where the Vorthok officers lived. This was more dangerous because some of the aliens might be awake. Moving through the corridors on personal business, Deho's enhanced hearing picked up footsteps before Borum could hear them. He pressed himself against the wall and motioned for her to hide behind a support beam. A Vorthok officer walked past, heading toward the recreation areas. He never saw the human and werewolf pressed against the shadows. They waited until the footsteps faded away, and continued moving toward the central tower. The third checkpoint was more complex, requiring both biological verification and access codes. Borum had spent weeks learning the guard schedules, and had memorized the codes by watching the security officers enter them. But when they reached the checkpoint, they found a problem. An extra guard had been posted, someone who was not supposed to be there according to the schedule. Deho looked at Borum and saw her concern. They could not go back now, not when they were so close to their goal. The wolf made a decision. He stepped out of the shadows and walked toward the guard, moving with the confident stride of a werewolf on official business. The guard looked surprised to see him, but did not immediately raise an alarm. "What are you doing here?" the guard asked in the Vorthok language. Deho could not speak, but he had learned to imitate the behavior of the perfect werewolves. He stood straight and stared at the guard with the cold expression of a military asset waiting for orders. The guard assumed that Deho was on a mission for one of the officers. Werewolves were not supposed to be questioned by lower-ranking personnel. While the guard was distracted, Borum slipped past them and disabled the alarm system from the inside. "You may pass," the guard said, stepping aside. Deho walked through the checkpoint, and Borum followed a few minutes later, disguised as a maintenance worker responding to a system malfunction. The central tower was the most heavily guarded part of the station. Here, the corridors were wider and brighter with cameras and sensors everywhere. Borum and Deho had to move very carefully. Timing their movements to avoid the security sweeps, they reached the communication center just as the maintenance shutdown began. For exactly 10 minutes, the security systems in this sector would be offline for routine updates. It was their only window of opportunity. The door to the communication center was locked with both electronic and mechanical systems. Borum had prepared for this, bringing cutting tools and bypass devices she had built in secret. While she worked on the locks, Deho watched the corridor for approaching guards. "Almost got it," Borum whispered as she connected her bypass device to the door controls. The lock clicked open just as Deho's ears detected the sound of footsteps approaching from the main corridor. They slipped inside and closed the door behind them. The communication center was filled with massive computers and transmission equipment. Banks of monitors showed communication traffic from across the Vorthok Empire. This was the nerve center of their military communications, and it contained everything Borum needed to complete her mission. She quickly connected her data recorder to the main transmission array. The device began uploading 3 years' worth of collected intelligence, preparing to send it in a single burst transmission to human space. Come on, Bora muttered. Watching the progress bar on a recorder, that was when they heard the alarms. The sound of warning sirens filled the air, and red lights began flashing throughout the communication center. Someone had discovered their infiltration. "We have been found," Bioram said, her voice tight with worry. Deho moved to the door and listened carefully. Heavy footsteps were approaching, along with the distinctive sound of werewolf claws on metal flooring. The perfect werewolves had been called in to deal with the intruders. Boram looked at her data recorder. The transmission was only halfway complete. They needed more time, but time was something they did not have. "Can you hold them off?" she asked Deho. The wolf looked at her with his mismatched eyes, and she saw no fear there, only determination. He had been rejected by the Empire, thrown away like garbage. But now he had a chance to prove that he was stronger than any of his perfect siblings. Deho moved to the center of the room, positioning himself between Bioram and the door. His muscles tensed as he prepared for battle, and for the first time since his rejection, he felt truly alive. The door exploded inward, and 3 perfect werewolves charged into the room. They were exactly as Bioram remembered from the Emperor's Hall, beautiful and terrible, with flowing fur and symmetric features. But they had never fought against someone like Deho. The first wolf expected him to attack directly, like a proper werewolf should. Instead, Deho used his awkward movements to confuse his opponent, dodging left when the perfect wolf expected him to go right. His claws found their target, and the first attacker went down. The second wolf tried to use superior speed to overwhelm Deho, but his asymmetric vision allowed him to track the attack from an impossible angle. He caught the perfect wolf mid-leap and threw him into the computer banks. The third wolf was more careful, trying to circle around and attack from behind. But Deho's camouflage patches made him hard to track in the flashing lights. When the perfect wolf finally committed to an attack, Deho was already moving, his unpredictable fighting style making him impossible to pin down behind him. Bioram watched the progress bar on her recorder. 80%, 90%. Almost there. More guards were approaching, and Bioram could hear the heavy footsteps of Vorthok officers. Soon they would be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Transmission complete, the recorder announced in human language. Bioram grabbed the device and turned toward the window. The communication center was high up in the central tower, with a clear view of the docking bays far below. "Deho, we need to go. Now." The wolf finished defeating the last of the perfect werewolves and turned toward her. His fur was matted with blood, but his eyes were bright with victory. He had proven himself stronger than his perfect siblings, not despite his differences, but because of them. Together they ran toward the window as the door burst open again. This time, it was Emperor Kyung-ho himself, accompanied by his personal guard. The Emperor's red eyes widened when he saw the rejected werewolf that should have been dead, fighting alongside a human spy. "Impossible," he breathed. But Bioram and Deho were already gone, crashing through the window into the night beyond. Their mission was complete, but the real battle was just beginning. Bioram and Deho fell through the night air, the wind rushing past them as they plummeted toward the docking bay far below. Bioram had prepared for this moment, and she activated the emergency grappling device she had built from scrap metal and cable. The hook caught on a maintenance platform, and they swung down to safety, landing hard on the metal decking. Around them, alarms continued to blare, and searchlights swept the area looking for the escaped intruders. "We did it," Bioram gasped, still holding her data recorder. "Information is on its way to human space." But their celebration was short-lived. Heavy footsteps echoed through the docking bay as squads of Vorthok guards surrounded them. From the upper levels, Emperor Kyung-ho's voice boomed through the station speakers. "Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick," the Emperor's voice announced. "Continue to resist, and you will suffer beyond imagination." Bioram and Deho stood back-to-back in the center of the docking bay, surrounded by dozens of armed guards. The situation looked hopeless, but neither of them was ready to give up. "You know what's funny?" Bioram said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You spent so much time making sure your werewolves were perfect that you forgot to make them loyal." Emperor Kyung-ho appeared on the upper walkway, his forearms gesturing angrily. You dare speak of loyalty? You are a spy and a thief." "A soldier," Borum replied, standing straighter. "We both serve causes greater than ourselves." "Can you say the same about your perfect pets?" The Emperor's face twisted with rage. "That abomination should have died in the waste sector. I will correct that mistake personally." "The only mistake here is yours," Bjorn said. He threw away. "The strongest wolf you ever bred because he did not look the way you wanted." As if to prove her point, Deho stepped forward. His mismatched eyes gleamed with intelligence and defiance. Despite being surrounded by enemies, he showed no fear. "Look at him," Borum continued. "Really look at him. He defeated 3 of your perfect war wolves without breaking a sweat. He infiltrated your most secure facility. He chose loyalty over obedience, friendship over fear." The Emperor raised his weapon, a plasma rifle that could disintegrate them both in seconds. "Enough talk. You will die now, and your human worlds will follow." "Actually," Borum said with a smile, "I do not think they will." That was when the first explosion shook the station. The data Bjorn had transmitted had not just contained intelligence about Vorthok plans. It had also included detailed information about the station's weaknesses, its critical systems, and exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. The human fleet had been waiting just outside the system, ready to attack as soon as they received the signal. Now they were here, and they were hitting the station with everything they had. But the explosions were not the only surprise. Throughout the station, other sounds began to echo through the corridors. The howls of war wolves, the shouts of maintenance, workers, the voices of every creature and being that the Vorthok had treated as disposable. Deho's victory over the perfect war wolves had been seen by the station's security cameras. The footage had spread through the lower levels, where the rejected and overlooked had watched in amazement as one of their own proved himself superior to the Empire's finest. Now they were rising up, war wolves that had been deemed imperfect, broke, free from their holding cells. Maintenance workers, both human and alien, abandoned their posts and began sabotaging critical systems. Even some of the younger Vorthok officers, who had grown tired of the Empire's obsession with perfection, joined the rebellion. Emperor Kyung-ho watched in horror as his perfect empire began to crumble around him. "This is impossible. The inferior cannot defeat the superior." "You still do not understand," Borum said, dodging plasma blasts as the battle raged around them. "There is no such thing as inferior or superior. There are only people who are given chances and people who are thrown away." Deho charged through the confused guards, his unpredictable movements making him impossible to target. Other warwolves, inspired by his example, began fighting alongside him. The perfect ones found themselves outmatched by opponents who fought with creativity and desperation instead of programmed responses. The battle spread throughout the station as the human fleet pressed their attack from outside. Bjorn's intelligence had been perfect, allowing the human ships to target the most vulnerable points. System after system failed as the station's defenses were overwhelmed, but the real victory was happening on the inside.
Wow.
The Empire's rigid hierarchy was collapsing as those on the bottom realized they outnumbered those on the top. The rejected warwolves were stronger and more innovative than the perfect ones. The maintenance workers knew the station better than the officers. The overlooked aliens had been waiting for this moment for years. Emperor Kyung-ho found himself alone on the upper walkway, his guards either dead or fled. Below him, Bjorn and Deho stood together, surrounded by a growing crowd of rebels. "You have destroyed everything," the Emperor said, his voice filled with desperate anger. "No," Borum replied. "We have freed everyone. Your empire was built on the lie that some people are worth more than others. Today, that lie dies." The Emperor raised his weapon for one final shot, but his hands were shaking with rage and fear. The blast went wide, and before he could fire, again Deho leaped up to the walkway. The rejected warwolf stood before the Emperor who had condemned him to death. For a moment, they stared at each other, predator and prey. "You called me an abomination," Deho's eyes seemed to say, "but I am still here, and your perfect empire is falling. The Emperor's defeat was not violent or dramatic. It was simply the moment when he realized that his entire worldview had been wrong. The creature he had thrown away had become the instrument of his destruction, as the station shook with more explosions and the sounds of celebration echoed through the corridors. Bjorn put her hand on Daho's head. "We did it, partner," she said. "We showed them what happens when you underestimate the wrong people." The Vorthok Empire's invasion of human space never happened. The intelligence Bjorn had transmitted allowed the human fleet to destroy the invasion force before it could launch. More importantly, the rebellion she and Daho had started spread to other Vorthok worlds, toppling the rigid hierarchy that had kept the Empire together. In the years that followed, the galaxy became a very different place. The new government that replaced the Empire was built on the idea that everyone had value, regardless of their appearance or background. Werewolves were no longer bred for perfection, but raised as individuals with their own choices and destinies. Borum returned to human space as a hero. She never forgot the lesson she had learned in the waste sector of a Vorthok station. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from those who have been cast aside, and the most important victories are won by those who refuse to accept that anyone is worthless. Daho became a symbol of the new galaxy, proof that being different was not a weakness, but a strength. He lived the rest of his life as he chose, free from the expectations and judgments of others. And in the end, the empire that had prized perfection above all else was brought down by an imperfect human and a rejected werewolf who had learned that true strength comes not from being flawless, but from being human enough to care about others. The revolution had begun in a waste sector, with one person refusing to walk away from another's pain. It ended with the transformation of an entire galaxy, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change the course of history.